A circus tent rose in our field one August evening. I sold her a ticket and lost my breath completely. She said, "We leave at dawn." "Always, like a warning," I said. "Then give me tonight." Before I could stop myself, she kissed me under the trapeze lights, then went still. "There's something about this town I never told you," she whispered. By morning, the tent was gone. And so was she. My name is Josephine Doyle, and I have lived my whole life in Cedar Hollow, Vermont, running the hardware store my father left me. I never imagined that a traveling circus, gone by sunrise, would be the thing that finally taught me who I really was. The circus posters appeared overnight, stapled to telephone poles, promising lions, acrobats, and a fortune teller who read palms by candlelight. My father had died 8 months earlier, and the store felt like a museum of his absence, quiet in ways I couldn't fix. My best friend Reagan dragged me to opening night, insisting I needed something, anything, to remind me I still existed. The ringmaster stepped into the spotlight wearing a tailored vest, and the whole tent seemed to lean toward her at once. She introduced herself as Marlo Vance, owner of the show her grandmother built from nothing during the Great Depression. Her voice carried across the bleachers like she was speaking only to me, though 300 people sat around us. After the show, I lingered by the ticket booth, pretending to study a flyer I had already memorized twice over. "You're the hardware store girl," she said, and I realized she had noticed me noticing her earlier. We walked past the animal pens, and she named every performer like family, which, she explained, they were. I asked how long the circus stayed in one place, and she said one night. Always. No exceptions. Ever. "Why one night?" asked, and something flickered across her face before she changed the subject entirely. We ended up sitting on overturned crates behind the big top, talking until the generator lights buzzed off. When she finally stood to leave, she took my hand and said, "I don't usually do this," and I believed her. Marlo left me a phone number scrawled on a ticket stub, telling me to call only if I meant it. I called that night from the store's back office, sitting on a paint-splattered stool, my heart hammering absurdly. She was 3 towns over already, in a diner parking lot, feeding a stray dog from a paper plate. We talked for 2 hours about nothing important, and somehow it felt like the most important conversation of my life. The following weekend, I drove 90 minutes to catch the circus in Brattleboro, telling Reagan I needed a change of scenery. Marlo met me by the ticket wagon wearing coveralls stained with sawdust, grinning like she'd been waiting all week. She introduced me to her Aunt Rosa, the tightrope walker, who studied me with narrowed, knowing eyes. "You're the one she's been humming about," Rosa said, and Marlo turned the color of the circus tent. After the show, Marlo showed me the trailer she'd grown up in, cluttered with photographs of 3 generations of performers. Her grandmother, Odessa Vance, stared out from a black and white photo, sharp-jawed and fearless, holding a whip like a scepter. "She built this show out of a single wagon in spite," Marlo said, "after my grandfather left her with nothing." I told her about my father, how he taught me to rewire a lamp before he taught me to ride a bike. Marlo listened the way no one had listened to me since the funeral, without rushing to fix my sadness. She admitted the circus route was fixed years in advance, a loop through New England that never changed and never lingered. "I've never let anyone drive out to see me before," she said quietly, like the fact embarrassed her. I started keeping a paper map on my kitchen wall, marking every town with a red pin as the circus moved. Some weekends I drove 3 hours just to watch her run the show for 40 minutes and then drive home. Reagan noticed the gas receipts piling up on my dashboard and asked, point blank, if I was seeing someone. I hadn't said the word aloud yet, not even to myself. So I just said, maybe, and left it there. Marlo started calling every night from a payphone outside whatever fairground they'd parked on, her voice softer in the dark. She told me about Sam, 16. The newest apprentice clown, who'd run away from a bad home and found one under the tent. We take in strays, she said. Animals and people both. And I understood she meant herself once too. I asked about her mother. And for the first time, Marlowe's easy confidence cracked into something guarded and small. She's not part of this anymore, was all she offered. And I didn't push, though I filed the sentence away. One night in Keene, she taught me to walk the low wire, holding my hands as I wobbled and laughed. We fell into the sawdust together, and she kissed me for the first time, unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. I don't do this, she said again, quieter this time. Fall for someone in a town, I'll leave by morning. So don't leave by morning, I said, and she laughed. But her eyes didn't agree with the laugh. I brought her home to Cedar Hollow on a rare Monday when the circus had no show scheduled nearby. We ate breakfast at the counter of my father's store, and she ran her fingers along the old wood like she recognized it. This town, she said slowly, has a strange way of feeling familiar, and a chill moved through me I couldn't explain. I asked if she'd been to Cedar Hollow before, and she shook her head too quickly, too firmly, and changed the subject. Reagan finally met her over pie at the diner and pronounced her annoyingly perfect, which from Reagan was high praise. My mother, when she heard, went quiet in a way that worried me more than shouting would have. A circus girl, she finally said, like the words themselves were the objection, and left the room. Marlowe never mentioned it, but I saw her flinch when I told her. Small and practiced, like she'd heard that reaction before. We started writing letters between visits. Her handwriting slanted and fast, mine careful, like I was afraid to waste the page. She wrote about sunsets in fairgrounds, about Sam's first solo act, about missing me in ways she said she'd never missed a place. I wrote about the store, about my father's ghost in every drawer, about how she'd made the quiet bearable again. By September, I knew the shape of her laugh, the scar on her left palm, the way she hummed before falling asleep. She knew my coffee order, my father's favorite tools, the exact creak of my apartment stairs from one visit. We were, without ever naming it plainly, building something neither of us had built with anyone else before. One evening she called and said, I told Rosa about you properly, not just as a friend, and I understood the weight of that. Rosa's response, relayed with a laugh, was, finally. She picks someone who isn't afraid of elephants or emotions. I laughed so hard I cried. And Marlowe, 3 hours away, said she wished she could see my face right then. The circus circuit would loop back toward Cedar Hollow in October. It's one guaranteed night in my town for the whole year. I want you to meet Odessa, Marlowe said suddenly. My grandmother. Before the circuit takes us south for winter. I hadn't realized her grandmother still traveled with the show. Frail now, riding in the lead wagon instead of the ring. Meeting Odessa felt like meeting royalty. A small woman with iron eyes who studied me longer than was comfortable. You're from here, Odessa said. Not a question. And something unreadable passed behind her expression before she looked away. Cedar Hollow, she repeated, tasting the words like they were bitter. And Marlowe's hand tightened around mine. I didn't understand the weight in that room yet. Only that some old story lived there. Unspoken and heavy. Word spread fast in Cedar Hollow, the way it always does. And soon everyone knew about Joey and the circus girl. My mother stopped bringing up Marlowe entirely, which felt worse than any argument. A silence built like a wall between us. At the hardware store, a regular customer made a joke about sideshow romance, and I nearly threw him out for it. Councilman Pete Herrera, my high school boyfriend once, started asking pointed questions about the circus's permits at town meetings. Just making sure everything's above board, he said, smiling too wide. And I recognized old jealousy wearing a new suit. Marlowe called to say the circuit committee had flagged Cedar Hollow's field permit for unresolved zoning concerns, that hadn't existed before. I confronted Pete directly, and he shrugged and said, "Some of us remember why that family left town the first time." The sentence landed like a stone in my stomach, because I hadn't known Marlowe's family had ever been here before. I asked Marlowe outright, and for the first time since we'd met, she went completely, carefully silent on the phone. "My mother grew up in Cedar Hollow," she finally admitted, "before Odessa took her and left for good, 26 years ago." "Why did they leave?" asked, though some part of me already feared the shape of the answer. "Because the town found out my mother loved a woman," Marlowe said flatly, "and made sure she couldn't stay." My chest tightened, thinking of my own mother's silence, wondering if history was simply repeating itself through me. "That's why we never stop anywhere," Marlowe said. "Odessa swore no Vance woman would ever be run out of a town again." I finally understood the one-night rule wasn't tradition. It was armor, built from a wound none of them had spoken of. I went home and searched my father's old ledgers, the ones from the hardware store dating back 30 years. Buried in a 1980s receipt book, I found a name, R. Vance. Credit extended, per J. Doyle, written in my father's hand. My father had known Marlowe's family, had quietly helped them, decades before I was even born into this story. I called Marlowe, shaking, and read her the entry, and she went quiet again, this time from shock, not caution. "My mother never told me a Doyle helped her," she said. "Only that someone in this town wasn't cruel to her." The discovery should have felt like fate, but it also felt like a door swinging open onto old, unfinished grief. I asked my mother directly if she remembered a Vance family, and her face went pale before she denied knowing anything. "Mom," I said, "I need you to tell me the truth." And for once, she actually sat down and did. She admitted the town council, back then, had quietly pressured the Vance family out, and my father had been the only dissenting voice. "He tried to stop it," she said, "and it cost him friendships he never got back. But he never regretted it." Learning this made me proud of my father and furious at Cedar Hollow in equal, exhausting measure. Meanwhile, Pete Herrera pushed the permit issue further, threatening to bar the circus from returning to town at all. Marlowe grew distant on the phone, her voice clipped, focused entirely on saving the show's only Vermont stop. "I can't lose this town again," she said. "Not after what it already cost my family once." I offered to speak at the town meeting, to fight the permit denial publicly, but she asked me not to. "If you stand up for us, everyone will know about you too," she said, "and I won't be the reason you lose your life here." Her protectiveness felt like love and like rejection at once, and I didn't know how to hold both. We had our first real fight over the phone, both of us frightened, both of us translating fear into anger. "You're always leaving anyway," I snapped. "So why does it matter if I have something to lose here?" The silence after that sentence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, but she was just crying quietly. "I have never once wanted to leave you," she said. "I just don't know how to want to stay somewhere." We hung up without resolving anything, and for 4 days neither of us called, both too stubborn and too scared. My mother, unexpectedly, was the one who broke the silence in our house, sitting across from me at breakfast. "I was wrong, all those years ago, to go along with what happened to that family," she said, staring at her coffee. "I don't want to make that mistake again," she added. "Not with my own daughter's happiness on the line." Her words cracked something open in me, and I finally cried the grief I'd been holding since my father's death. I decided to attend the town meeting myself, permit or no permit, invitation or none, because silence had cost enough already. The meeting room was packed, farmers and shop owners and Pete Herrera at the front table looking entirely too pleased. When public comment opened, I stood, my hands shaking, and said my name, and then said Marlowe's, out loud. In public. I told them about my father's ledger, about the family this town had already wronged once, and asked if we'd learn nothing. Pete tried to interrupt twice, and both times, neighbors I hadn't expected told him to let me finish speaking. I said I loved her. Plainly, in front of people I'd known my whole life, and the room went utterly silent. Then Reagan stood up beside me, followed by two of my father's old friends, and the silence turned into support. The permit vote was postponed pending further review, which wasn't victory, but it also wasn't the defeat Pete wanted. I called Marlo afterward, breathless, and told her everything, and she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You did that for us," she said, disbelief in her voice. "In front of everyone who could hurt you for it." "I did it because hiding never protected anyone in this story," I said. "Not your mother. Not my father. Not us." 2 weeks later, Marlo called at 2 a.m., her voice raw, saying an electrical fire had torn through the costume wagon. No one was hurt, but decades of Odessa's original costumes and photographs had burned before anyone could save them. I drove through the night to reach them in Concord, arriving as dawn broke over a field full of scorched canvas. Marlo stood in the wreckage looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, holding a single surviving photograph of her grandmother. "This show is everything she built," Marlo said, "and I just watched pieces of her disappear in one night." I held her while she cried, really cried. For the first time since I'd known her, and I didn't try to fix it. The insurance adjuster estimated repairs at a sum that would gut the circus's already thin operating budget for the year. A land developer, coincidentally, offered to buy the touring rights in Odessa's old winter lot outside Sarasota that same week. "They've wanted this land for years," Marlo said. "They'll take advantage of any weakness they can find." Odessa, weakened by the stress, was hospitalized briefly with chest pains, and the whole show seemed to hold its breath. I sat with Marlo in the hospital hallway, watching her hand shake around a paper coffee cup she never drank from. "If I lose her," Marlo whispered, "I lose the last person who remembers why any of this ever mattered." I told her I wasn't going anywhere, that whatever happened with the circus, she wouldn't face it without me. "You have a store," she said. "A whole life rooted in Cedar Hollow. You can't keep driving to hospital hallways for me." "Watch me," I said, and something in her face finally fully believed that I meant it. Odessa recovered enough to come home, but the doctor's warning about her heart hung over the show like a low ceiling. "I'm not afraid of dying," Odessa told me privately. "I'm afraid of this show dying with me, unfinished and unforgiven." I asked what she meant by unforgiven, and she finally told me the full story of leaving Cedar Hollow decades ago. "Your father was the only one who came to say goodbye," she said. "Everyone else pretended we'd simply vanished. I never got to thank him properly," she added. "Tell him what that goodbye meant to a woman with nowhere else to go." I told her I could take her there, to the store, to see it standing exactly where he'd left it. Odessa hesitated, then nodded. And I understood the trip would be as much reckoning as reunion for her. Meanwhile, the developer's offer tightened its deadline, and Marlo began quietly considering selling the winter lot to cover repairs. "It's just land," she said, unconvincingly. "The show is people, not property," though her voice didn't sound like she believed it. I worried she was making the decision out of panic rather than clarity, and I said so, gently. "One night." She snapped back that I couldn't understand what it meant to watch your entire inheritance collapse in real time. We argued again. Sharper this time. Both of us exhausted and frightened in ways neither of us said outright. "Maybe you should have stayed a one-night stop," she said bitterly, and immediately looked horrified at her own words. I left without responding, driving home in silence, replaying the sentence until it stopped meaning anything and started meaning everything. For a week, we didn't speak, and I threw myself into the store, rearranging shelves that didn't need rearranging. Reagan finally sat me down and said, You've never let one bad night define a whole relationship before. Why start now? I realized I was doing exactly what Marlo feared. Treating one hard moment like proof the whole thing would collapse. I drove to meet the circus in Manchester, uninvited, and found Marlo sitting alone under the half-repaired big top. I'm sorry, she said before I could speak. I was cruel because I was scared. And I took it out on you. I know, I said. But I need you to stop pushing me away every time something gets hard. We sat together in the empty tent, and she finally told me the developer's offer would save the show but cost its soul. Odessa's whole point was never selling out, Marlo said. Not to prejudice. Not to money. Not to fear. I suggested. Carefully. An alternative. A community fundraiser in Cedar Hollow, tying the circus's survival to the town that once failed them. You want me to ask the town that ran my family out for help rebuilding, Marlo said. Disbelief plain in her voice. I want to give them the chance to be better this time, I said. The way my father tried to be. She was skeptical. But Odessa, when we proposed it, simply said, let them prove it or prove me right. We organized the fundraiser in 3 frantic weeks. Posters in every shop window. Reagan handling logistics like a general. My mother, to my genuine shock, volunteered to run the bake sale table herself. A small but enormous gesture. Pete Herrera, still bitter, tried once more to block the event citing noise ordinances, and this time the council overruled him outright. The night before the fundraiser, Sam confided in me that he was terrified the show might not survive regardless of the outcome. This is the only home I've ever had, he said. And I promised him I'd do everything I could to protect it. Odessa asked to speak at the fundraiser herself, despite her health. And Marlo fought her on it and lost completely. The morning of the event, the field filled faster than anyone expected. Cars lining the road for half a mile. I stood backstage with Marlo, both of us watching the crowd through a gap in the canvas, holding our breath together. Whatever happens today, she said, thank you for making me believe this town could still surprise me. It's not done surprising you yet, I said, squeezing her hand as the lights came up over the makeshift stage. Odessa walked out slowly, leaning on a cane, and the entire field of Cedar Hollow rose to its feet in silence. Odessa's voice, though frail, carried across the field the way it must have carried across circus rings for 60 years. She told the town the true story of why the Vance family left, holding nothing back. Not shame. Not softness. She spoke of a young woman who loved another woman and was told to leave before her sin, as they called it, spread. I built a show that never stopped anywhere, she said, so no one could ever tell my daughter to leave again. The field was utterly silent except for the wind moving through the canvas above us, holding the whole crowd still. I'm not here for an apology, Odessa said. I'm here because my granddaughter found something in this town worth trusting. She looked directly at me and Marlo, standing hand in hand at the edge of the stage. Unhidden for the first time, someone in the crowd started clapping, hesitant at first, and then the applause rolled through the field like weather. My mother stood up from the bake sale table, tears on her face, clapping harder than anyone else around her. Even Pete Herrera, arms crossed, offered a small, reluctant nod, which from him was as close to apology as we'd get. The fundraiser raised nearly triple what Marlo needed to cover the fire damage and declined the developer's offer entirely. Marlo stood in the middle of it all, done, watching her family's worst chapter turn into something bearable, even hopeful. That night, after the crowd left, we sat with Odessa by a small fire, the 3 of us finally, fully at peace. I always wondered if I'd ever see this field again without wanting to run, Odessa said. Now I don't want to leave it, she asked quietly. If the show might winter in Cedar Hollow this year instead of Sarasota, just once, to see how it felt. Marlo looked at me, silently asking permission for something neither of us had dared imagine possible before that night. Stay, I said. Not forever if you're not ready, but stay long enough to know what staying even feels like. Odessa passed away peacefully 3 weeks later. In her sleep. In the winter lot she'd chosen to trust one last time. The whole show grieved together. And half of Cedar Hollow came to the small service held under the big top. Marlo inherited the circus fully, along with every decision about its future that had once belonged only to her grandmother. For weeks she wrestled with what Odessa's legacy actually meant, whether staying anywhere honored her memory or betrayed it. She spent her whole life running from a wound, Marlo said. I don't want to spend mine doing the same thing. I told her I would never ask her to give up the circus, that I had fallen for a woman who traveled. But I don't want you to keep running just because stopping feels dangerous, I added. Not anymore. Not here. Marlo sat with that for days, walking the empty winter lot alone, running her hand along Odessa's old wagon. She finally proposed something neither of us had considered, touring actively for 8 months, then wintering every year in Cedar Hollow. A real stop, she said. Not one night. Season. Here. With you. Every single year without exception. I cried harder at that offer than I had at any single moment since my father's funeral. In the best possible way. We converted the old grain silo behind my store into winter storage for the wagons. Strange. Beautiful merging of two lives. Sam decided to stay year-round too, enrolling in the local high school during winters, finally getting the stability he'd never had. Pete Herrera, of all people, ended up drafting the new permit himself, calling it overdue, which was as close to sorry as he'd manage. My mother invited Marlo to Sunday dinner without hesitation, setting an extra place at the table like it was nothing new. The following spring, Marlo asked me, in the same field where we'd first met, if I would marry her someday. Not yet, she said. Not until the show is steady and I know I can promise you a real home. You already are my home, I told her. Wagon or store. One night or every night. It was never about the address. We didn't marry that year. But we built something steadier than a wedding. A rhythm of leaving and returning that finally felt safe. I kept my father's ledger on the store counter, the page with Marlo's mother's name pressed flat under glass. Unforgotten. Odessa's whip hung above the register beside it, not as a relic of fear, but as proof that some legacies do heal. Every October, the circus rolls back into that same field. And every October, the whole town shows up to welcome it home. I still sell tickets from the same booth where I lost my breath the first time I ever saw her. People sometimes ask if I regret falling for a woman who was only supposed to stay one night, and I always laugh. One night was never the ending. It was only the first stop on the longest, truest journey either of us ever took. Fendi.